Hello guys! Today we're diving deep into the absolutely fascinating psychological puzzle that is JD Vance. You know, the guy who somehow morphed from Trump critic to Trump's biggest cheerleader faster than you can say hillbilly elegy. We're going to dissect this political chameleon's personality like he's a particularly confusing case study from Psychology 101. Before we start this psychological evaluation, drop a comment and let me know what other politicians or public figures you think need a good old-fashioned personality breakdown. I'm always looking for new subjects to completely overanalyze, and please like and subscribe to support me in this totally unauthorized mission. So, let's talk about James David Vance. Born August 2nd, 1984 in Middletown, Ohio. And right off the bat, we need to talk about the name situation because honestly, it's like a psychological red flag wrapped in an identity crisis. This guy has had more names than a witness protection program participant. Started as James Donald Bowman, then became James David Hamill when his mum remarried, and finally settled on JD Vance when his grandparents took over parenting duties. It's like he was practicing for his future career as a political shapeshifter before he could even spell consistency. His childhood reads like a textbook example of adverse childhood experiences. Mum struggled with drug addiction, Dad basically disappeared after giving him up for adoption at age 6, and little JD got shuffled around more than a deck of cards at a casino. The only stable figures were his grandparents, Mama and Papa, who essentially raised him while everyone else was busy being dysfunctional. Now, somebody asked me if this kind of childhood creates narcissistic tendencies, and oh boy, do we have some material to work with here. Classic narcissistic development often stems from either excessive praise or complete neglect, and Vance got a lovely combination of both. Grandparents who probably overcompensated for the chaos, mixed with parents who were emotionally unavailable. It's like a perfect recipe for creating someone who desperately craves validation while simultaneously believing they're superior to everyone around them. Fast forward through high school, and our boy JD decides to join the Marines in 2003. Served 4 years, deployed to Iraq as a military journalist. And here's where it gets interesting from a psychological perspective. Military service often provides structure and identity for people who lacked it in childhood. But Vance's experience seems to have reinforced his sense of being special, being different from the regular people back home. He wasn't just a Marine, he was a Marine who was going places. You can almost see the superiority complex crystallizing like salt on a pretzel. After the Marines, he goes to Ohio State, then Yale Law School. And Yale, oh Yale, this is where things get really psychologically juicy. Suddenly, this kid from Middletown is rubbing shoulders with the elite. Classic imposter syndrome mixed with desperate overcompensation. He's simultaneously trying to prove he belongs while also maintaining his authentic, working-class identity. It's like watching someone try to be two people at once, which, spoiler alert, becomes a major theme in his personality. During law school, he writes these emails to a transgender friend, Sophia Nelson, that are actually quite empathetic and apologetic. He's genuinely concerned about misrepresenting her in his book. Signs emails with "Love you, JD." Now, contrast that with his later positions on transgender issues. It's like Jekyll and Hyde if Jekyll studied law and Hyde ran for Senate. This brings us to what I call the Vance pivot. His remarkable ability to completely reverse his positions without any apparent psychological discomfort. Most people experience cognitive dissonance when their beliefs contradict their actions. Not JD Vance. This guy switches ideological positions like he's changing channels on Netflix. In 2016, he's calling Trump America's Hitler and a cynical asshole. By 2021, he's basically Trump's psychological support dog. That level of ideological flexibility suggests either remarkable intellectual dishonesty or a personality structure that's fundamentally unstable. I'm leaning toward the latter. Now, let's talk about Hillbilly Elegy, because this book is basically Vance's personality in 300 pages. On the surface, it's a memoir about growing up poor in Appalachia. But psychologically, it's a masterclass in what we call bootstrap narrative disorder. I made that term up, but it should be a real thing. Vance essentially argues that poor people are poor because they make bad choices, while simultaneously positioning himself as the enlightened exception who escaped through sheer willpower and moral superiority. It's like survivor's guilt in reverse. Instead of feeling bad about leaving his community behind, he feels superior for doing so. The book reeks of what psychologists call fundamental attribution error. When good things happen to him, it's because of his character and hard work. When bad things happen to other people, it's because of their character flaws. Classic narcissistic thinking pattern right there. And the way he describes his own family members in the book, with such clinical detachment and barely concealed contempt, tells you everything you need to know about his capacity for empathy. He writes about his mother's addiction and his community struggles like he's David Attenborough narrating a nature documentary about a particularly unsuccessful species. Speaking of empathy, let's discuss his famous childless cat ladies comment. In 2021, he tells Tucker Carlson that Democrats are run by childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives. Now, setting aside the obvious misogyny and weird obsession with other people's reproductive choices, let's analyze what this comment reveals psychologically. First, it shows a complete inability to understand that people might make different life choices for valid reasons. Classic narcissistic trait. If your choices are different from mine, your choices must be wrong. Second, the projection is just chef's kiss obvious. He's calling other people miserable while he's the one who seems perpetually angry about everything. It's like a psychological mirror held up to show his own insecurities about meaning and purpose. Third, the comment reveals what psychologists call in-group superiority bias. People with children are inherently better than people without children, according to JD's worldview. Never mind that some people can't have children, choose not to have children, or define family differently. Nope. In Vance's binary thinking, you're either team procreation or team miserable cat lady. The fascinating part is how he's tried to walk this back. First, it was sarcasm. Then it was a joke. Then it was taken out of context. Then it was actually a serious point about family policy. Watching him try to rehabilitate this comment is like watching someone play psychological twister. Left foot on denial, right hand on rationalization, now spin around and land on, it was just a prank, bro. But here's the thing about personality. It's consistent across situations. And Vance's pattern of making inflammatory comments and then trying to explain them away suggests someone who either lacks impulse control or genuinely believes in these things, but lacks the courage to own them consistently. Neither option is particularly flattering, behaviorally speaking. Let's talk about his relationship with power and authority figures. This is where it gets really interesting. Vance has this remarkable ability to identify powerful people and attach himself to them like a psychological barnacle. First, it was the liberal elites at Yale and in publishing who made his book successful. Then it was Peter Thiel, the billionaire tech investor who funded his venture capital career. Now, it's Trump, the political figure he once compared to Hitler. This pattern suggests what psychologists call instrumental attachment. He doesn't form genuine relationships. He forms strategic alliances based on what people can do for his career. It's like he views other humans as ladder rungs rather than, actual humans. And the speed with which he switches allegiances suggests that his core identity is remarkably malleable. Most people have some bedrock beliefs that remain consistent even as they grow and change. Vance seems to have the psychological equivalent of silly putty where his core beliefs should be. Now, somebody may be wondering if Vance could be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, and while I can't diagnose anyone from a distance, let's look at the criteria. Superficial charm? Check. The guy wrote a best-selling memoir. Grandiose sense of self-worth? Double check. He literally wrote a book about how he's better than everyone he grew up with. Pathological lying? Well, Let's just say his relationship with truth is complicated. Lack of empathy. His writing about his own family suggests emotional detachment that would make a robot uncomfortable. Manipulative behavior. His career trajectory speaks for itself. I'm not saying he meets the clinical criteria, but if antisocial personality disorder was a college major, JD Vance would be valedictorian. Let's talk about his conversion to Catholicism in 2019. Now, religious conversion can be a beautiful, transformative experience. But the timing here is suspicious, psychologically speaking. He converts just as he's preparing to enter politics, in a state where Catholic voters matter. It's like spiritual gerrymandering, and his choice of patron saint, Saint Augustine, is particularly telling. Augustine was famous for his wild youth before becoming a serious religious figure. It's almost like Vance is trying to create a narrative where his previous liberal positions were just his wild youth phase before finding political Jesus. The psychological term for this is narrative reconstruction, essentially rewriting your personal history to serve your current identity. Vance has turned this into an art form. His entire career is essentially one long exercise in retrofitting his biography to match whatever constituency he's trying to appeal to. Marine veteran for conservative street cred? Check. Ivy League education for elite acceptance? Check. Working class roots for populist appeal? Check. Religious conversion for moral authority? Check. It's like he's assembling a political identity from a catalogue of acceptable biographical elements. Now, let's analyse his communication style, because it reveals so much about his psychological state. Vance has this interesting habit of making extreme statements and then immediately trying to soften them. It's like he has an internal conflict between wanting to say outrageous things for attention and knowing that outrageous things have consequences. This suggests what psychologists call approach avoidance conflict. He wants the benefits of being provocative, attention, media coverage, conservative credibility, but he also wants to avoid the costs, criticism, backlash, having to defend unpopular positions. So he says the thing, then spends weeks explaining why he didn't really mean the thing, or meant it differently, or was taken out of context. It's psychological having your cake and eating it too, except the cake is controversy and everyone can see you chewing. His debate performance with Tim Walz was particularly revealing in terms of personality psychology. Vance was polished, prepared, and completely artificial. He had clearly practiced every facial expression, every gesture, every pause. It was like watching a very sophisticated chatbot trying to pass the Turing test for a relatable human politician. The disconnect between his carefully modulated public persona and his history of inflammatory comments suggests someone who's constantly performing rather than authentically communicating. It's exhausting just watching him try to be whatever he thinks people want him to be in any given moment. Speaking of performance, let's talk about his relationship with his own image. Somebody mentioned his beard, and honestly it's worth discussing. The clean-shaven JD Vance, who wrote Hillbilly Elegy, looked like an eager graduate student. The bearded JD Vance running for office looks like he's cosplaying as a lumberjack who went to law school. Physical appearance changes can reflect internal psychological shifts. The beard isn't just facial hair, it's a costume piece in his ongoing performance of authentic masculine conservative. It's like he looked in the mirror one day and thought, you know what would make me look more serious and manly? Strategic facial hair placement. From a psychiatric viewpoint, dramatic appearance changes often coincide with identity crises or deliberate self-reinvention. Given Vance's pattern of ideological shapeshifting, the beard makes perfect sense. It's the physical manifestation of his political transformation. Now, let's discuss his family dynamics, because they're psychologically fascinating. He's married to Usha Chilukuri, a brilliant lawyer who clerked for Chief Justice Roberts. She's accomplished, sophisticated, and by all accounts much more stable than her husband. This suggests what psychologists call complementary pairing. He provides ambition and charisma. She provides stability and grounding. But here's what's interesting. Their interfaith marriage, he's Catholic, she's Hindu, requires a level of tolerance and compromise that seems at odds with his public positions on cultural issues. It's like his personal life operates on different principles than his political positions. Either he's compartmentalizing to an extreme degree, or his public persona is largely performative. Both options raise questions about authenticity and psychological integration. His children are carefully kept out of the public eye, which is probably smart given his tendency to attract controversy. But it also suggests an awareness that his political choices might have negative consequences for people he actually cares about. This selective empathy, protecting his own family while making policies that hurt other families, is psychologically revealing. It shows he understands the potential harm of his positions. He just doesn't extend that understanding beyond his immediate circle. Classic in-group favoritism taken to an extreme. Let's talk about his economic views, because they reveal interesting psychological contradictions. Vance positions himself as a champion of the working class while being funded by billionaire tech investors. He rails against economic elites while being an economic elite himself. This cognitive dissonance would be psychologically uncomfortable for most people, but Vance seems remarkably comfortable holding contradictory positions simultaneously. His net worth is estimated around $10 million, putting him firmly in the category of people he claims to oppose. But he maintains this populist persona like a method actor who never breaks character. Now, somebody asked about his relationship with Donald Trump, and boy, is this a psychological case study. Vance went from calling Trump America's Hitler to becoming his running mate in less than a decade. That's not political evolution, that's psychological whiplash. The complete 180 on Trump suggests someone whose core beliefs are subordinate to career advancement. Most people can't simply reverse their fundamental assessment of someone's character without experiencing significant psychological distress. Vance seems to have managed this transition with the ease of someone changing their Netflix subscription. His current role as Trump's attack dog suggests someone who's either completely abandoned his previous convictions or never really had convictions to begin with. The way he defends Trump now with such fervor and certainty almost suggests overcorrection, like he's trying to prove his loyalty by being more Trumpist than Trump himself. It's classic convert behavior. The newly faithful often become more zealous than those born to the faith. Let's analyze his media strategy, because it reveals patterns of psychological manipulation. Vance has mastered the art of saying something inflammatory, then spending days explaining what he really meant. This keeps him in the news cycle while allowing him to claim he's being misunderstood. The psychological term for this is strategic ambiguity. Saying things that can be interpreted multiple ways so you can always claim the interpretation that serves you best. He makes statements that sound extreme enough to excite his base, but vague enough that he can walk them back if necessary. And when he gets called out, he has this interesting habit of claiming he was being sarcastic or making a joke. This is what psychologists call Schrodinger's douchebag, someone who decides whether they were serious or joking based on the reaction they receive. If people react positively, he was serious. If people react negatively, he was obviously joking, and everyone else just doesn't have a sense of humor. Now, let's talk about his policy positions, because they reveal interesting patterns of psychological projection. Vance is obsessed with other people's family structures, while his own family crosses religious and cultural boundaries. He condemns childless cat ladies while benefiting from childcare provided by his mother-in-law. He rails against cosmopolitan elites while being a cosmopolitan elite himself. Let's discuss his relationship with truth, because it's psychologically fascinating. Vance has this remarkable ability to make factual claims that are demonstrably false, then move on as if accuracy doesn't matter. This suggests what psychologists call instrumental relationship with truth. Truth is useful when it serves your purposes. irrelevant when it doesn't. His promotion of the false claim about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield, Ohio, is a perfect example. Even after local officials and the Republican governor debunked this claim, Vance continued promoting it. He knows the claim is false, but he continues making it because it serves his political purposes. That's not ignorance, that's strategic deception. Now, let's talk about his social media presence, because it's like a direct pipeline to his psychological state. Vance's Twitter feed reads like the internal monologue of someone who's perpetually angry about everything. This constant state of outrage suggests what psychologists call chronic stress response. His nervous system seems permanently activated for conflict. People in constant fight-or-flight mode don't make good decisions because their prefrontal cortex is essentially offline. His social media strategy seems to be tweet first, think later, explain eventually. The tone, always combative, always defensive, always positioned as the victim of unfair treatment, suggests someone with a very fragile ego who's constantly feeling attacked. Now, somebody asked about his childhood trauma and how it might have shaped his personality. Abandonment by his father at age 6, inconsistent caregiving from his mother due to addiction, being raised primarily by grandparents. These are textbook adverse childhood experiences. Vance seems to have developed both hypervigilance and emotional numbing as coping mechanisms. He's hypervigilant about potential threats to his status and reputation, hence the constant defensiveness. But he's also emotionally numb when it comes to empathy for others, hence his ability to write coldly about his family's struggles. This combination creates someone who's simultaneously oversensitive to criticism and undersensitive to other people's feelings. The abandonment issues probably contribute to his pattern of attaching to powerful figures. People who experienced early abandonment often develop anxious attachment. They desperately seek approval from authority figures while simultaneously preparing for inevitable rejection. This might explain his willingness to completely reverse his positions to gain Trump's approval. Trump represents the powerful father figure who might finally provide the approval and protection that his actual father never gave him. Let's talk about his relationship with his hometown and the people he grew up with. Vance has this interesting pattern of simultaneously claiming to represent working-class people while demonstrating clear contempt for working-class culture. He positions himself as their champion while describing them as lazy, addicted, and making poor choices. This suggests what psychologists call internalized classism. He's absorbed negative stereotypes about his background and projects them onto others while exempting himself. He escaped poverty. Therefore, he must be fundamentally different from and better than the people who didn't escape. His writing about Middletown reads like anthropological field notes about an exotic culture rather than personal memories about his community. Now, let's discuss his relationship with women, because his comments reveal some fascinating psychological patterns. The childless cat lady's comment suggests someone who views women primarily through the lens of their relationships to men and children, rather than as independent agents. Given his mother's struggles with addiction and inconsistent caregiving, it's possible he developed complicated feelings about women's reliability and autonomy. The psychological term for this is Madonna whore complex, dividing women into categories of good, mothers' wives, and bad, independent childless. Let's analyze his career transitions because they show interesting patterns of psychological adaptation. Military to academic to corporate law to venture capital to politics. Each transition represents a complete reinvention of his professional identity. Vance seems to approach career changes like an actor taking on completely different roles. The rapidity of these transitions suggests someone who's always looking for the next opportunity rather than building expertise in any particular area. His venture capital career is particularly interesting because it positioned him as someone who profits from the kind of economic changes that devastated his hometown. The psychological compartmentalization required to champion working class causes while literally investing in automation and globalization is remarkable. Let's discuss his relationship with loyalty and betrayal, because it reveals core aspects of his personality structure. Vance's political biography is essentially a series of betrayals disguised as evolutions. He betrayed his working class roots by writing a book that blamed poor people for being poor. He betrayed his liberal supporters by becoming a conservative. He betrayed his previous assessment of Trump by becoming his running mate. This pattern suggests someone who views relationships instrumentally rather than emotionally. The speed and completeness of these reversals suggests someone who doesn't experience the normal psychological costs of betrayal. His ability to criticize Trump in the harshest possible terms and then become his most loyal defender suggests someone whose emotional attachments are remarkably shallow. Let's analyze his relationship with criticism, because it reveals core aspects of his psychological defense mechanisms. Vance responds to criticism by immediately attacking the credibility of his critics, rather than addressing the substance of their concerns. When people criticize his child as cat lady's comment, he doesn't apologize or clarify his position. Instead, he attacks Democrats for being anti-family. This pattern suggests someone who experiences criticism as a fundamental threat to his self-image rather than as useful feedback. Most psychologically healthy people can distinguish between criticism of their actions and attacks on their character. Vance seems to experience all criticism as personal attacks, which suggests a very fragile sense of self beneath the confident exterior. Now, somebody asked me what I think drives JD Vance fundamentally, and honestly, it seems to be a desperate need for external validation, combined with deep resentment about having to seek that validation. He wants to be seen as important, successful, and respected, but he also resents the people whose approval he seeks. He wrote a book for liberal elites, then resented them for embracing it. He sought Trump's endorsement, then has to constantly prove his loyalty. This suggests someone who's never resolved the fundamental question of who he wants to be. He's constantly performing different versions of himself for different audiences, but none of these performances seem authentic to him. Vance seems to have outsourced his identity formation to whatever audience he's trying to impress at any given moment. That's not political pragmatism, that's psychological chaos. Let's talk about his future psychological trajectory, because his current patterns suggest some interesting possibilities. People with his psychological profile often experience narcissistic collapse when their external validation sources dry up. His identity seems so dependent on external success and approval that any major setback could trigger a crisis. Most people can only maintain so many contradictory positions before experiencing psychological breakdown or becoming completely cynical. Vance seems to be approaching that threshold. From my completely unauthorized psychological assessment, I'd predict that he'll either experience a significant psychological crisis within the next few years, or he'll become completely disconnected from authentic emotion. Based on his patterns so far, I'm not optimistic about the self-reflection option. Now you may be wondering what his personality profile means for his role as vice president, and honestly, it's like watching a psychological experiment in real time. The VP role traditionally requires subordinating your ego to support someone else's agenda. But Vance's psychological makeup suggests someone who struggles with genuine loyalty unless it serves his advancement. Psychology-wise, people with his profile tend to view all relationships instrumentally, which means his loyalty probably has an expiration date that coincides with his next career opportunity. And honestly, his success tells us as much about our broken political system as it does about his character. We've created institutions that reward manipulation and performance over authenticity and integrity. So there you have it, folks. JD Vance, a walking case study in how childhood trauma, unchecked ambition, and political opportunism can combine to create someone who's simultaneously the perfect product of our broken system and completely unsuited for actual leadership. He's like if you took every red flag from Psychology 101 and gave them a Yale law degree and a carefully cultivated beard. If this analysis has left you questioning the psychological health of our political system, well, welcome to reality. Drop a like if you enjoyed this completely unauthorized breakdown. Subscribe for more armchair analysis of people who probably shouldn't be trusted with a houseplant, let alone political power. And tell me in the comments which other political figures deserve the full psychological treatment. Until next time, remember, just because someone can write a best-selling memoir doesn't mean they're mentally equipped to run a country. Though apparently it doesn't disqualify them either. Sweet dreams, America.